Hello friends, welcome back to Sorry What. Before we start today's story, please show some love by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Thank you, I really appreciate your support. Now on to the story. Sated and exhausted after a bout of horizontal gymnastics in bed, my wife of 27 years and I lay in each other's arms for about 10 minutes. Her eyes were closed, and she had a contented, tired smile on her face. Since her eyes were closed, she couldn't see that I, too, was smiling. Making love to my wife for an hour and getting her to many times on my fingers, tongue and neck had me feeling pretty good. No, great actually. She was everything in life to me, and I loved pleasing her to the extreme. Everything in our life was perfect, I thought. I would soon find out that perfect was a fleeting concept. Our lying in bed after making love was an important part of our process. The snuggling and cuddling, the little thoughts we exchanged in our afterglow were part of connecting, as we called it. Very often we exchanged in, I love you, or similar feelings. Sometimes it was nothing more than her purring and me humming my agreement. On this night, however, she whispered something softly into my neck that I was sure I didn't hear correctly. Wait, what? I asked in a voice that started softly but finished full strength as I moved my face away from hers, so I could study her. I've been seeing another man for the last several months, my wife repeated, this time only slightly louder but not garbled by the sound of my flesh. Duck. You've got to be kidding me. Tell me that this isn't some kind of cruel joke. I yelled as I jumped out of bed. She continued to lie on the bed, but turned her head to look at my now standing form. I've been seeing another man, Joshua. I'm serious. This is not a joke, she said. I've needed to tell you this for some time because the guilt has been killing me, but I've determined there was never going to be an ideal time to do it, so I just felt like I should do something this important during a time when we were at our closest. Wait, I interjected as the light bulb above my head suddenly went on. So you're really telling me that you've been ducking another man, having an affair? That's what you're telling me when you say you've been seeing someone. As was our habit when we made love at night, the only light in the room was from a clock on my wife's nightstand. We could see each other well enough in the mostly dark room for playing and lovemaking, but the soft lighting wasn't enough for me to see into her soul through her eyes, which is why she picked this time to make this confession, I guessed, assuming for the moment that it was a confession. The silence in the room stretched out for what I felt was an eternity, but in reality, was probably no more than a few seconds. Yes, I have been having an affair, she admitted softly. Duck, I said just as softly. I thought you loved me. We just finished making love. I staggered to the side of the bed and sat down, then realized I still had her juices on my face. I headed into the ensuite bathroom, clicked on the light and started to clean my face. She came in a few seconds later to do some cleanup of her own. I do love you, Joshua. I always will. That hasn't changed, she said as she gingerly cleaned her lady parts with a washcloth. I stood at my sink feeling like someone had just hit me in the stomach with a baseball bat. I hadn't cried since my father died about 10 years ago, but I was coming close. How could you be ducking another guy if you love me? I asked, trying my best not to sound like a whining wimp. You don't cheat on somebody you love. I would never cheat on you because I love you. I'm glad you feel that way, Joshua, but my having sex with another man doesn't diminish my love for you in any way, she explained slowly, like one would to a slow child. I care for him differently than I care for you. A person can have feelings for more than one other person. You have different feelings for me and the kids and your mother, but you still love us, right? I have feelings for you and the kids and my parents, but I still love all of you. I've just added another person to my list. So you love this guy? What the duck, Monique? I do have feelings for him, Joshua, but not on the same level as the feelings I have for you. You're my husband, my number one love, she said, still using that superior tone. There's not supposed to be anything after number one, I rasped. You don't duck anyone else besides your husband. Do you have to keep being so crude and using that term? You know I hate that word. You've never used it when you've talked to me before, she lectured. Excuse the duck out of me. I've never been told by my wife before that she's ducking another man. I put on my robe and went downstairs to the family room. I turned on the TV although I knew I wasn't going to watch it. Reflex move. I just needed some time to think. Apparently, that wasn't going to happen, though, because less than a minute later Monique came downstairs in a short robe, as opposed to her long, fluffy robe. She wasn't stupid. She wanted to distract me, and she knew her body always had that effect on me. At 50 years old like I was, Monique looked like she was maybe 40, despite having 2 grown children. She worked out 3 times a week, and her body was both curvy and yet muscular. Her mop of blonde curls went down to her shoulders, and I could get lost in those azure eyes forever. I need some time to think about this, Monique. You coming down here is not going to speed up my thinking, I said harshly. No, we need to talk about this, baby. I love you, and what I have with Paul doesn't interfere with what we have. It's really outside of us, Monique said as she tried to settle into my lap. Before I told you about Paul, didn't you think we had a practically perfect marriage? That's because I was discreet with Paul, and nothing I did took anything away from you. I never turned you down for anything, did I? I pushed her off my lap. I had to admit that I never suspected anything was wrong in my marriage until Monique confessed. Our sex life was pretty good for a couple of 50-year-olds, and I noticed no fall off in recent months. The only thing I did notice recently was that Monique seemed to be happier. She often hummed while she made dinner. Oh duck. The happiness was obviously coming from her affair, not from boring old hubby. I did think we had a practically perfect marriage, Mo. But now I've found out that your happiness apparently was being generated by your affair with Paul. Paul who, by the way? You don't need to know that. All you need to know is that we have been discreet, she answered, her tone suddenly clipped. I do need to know, Monique, I answered sharply. Somebody named Paul has been buffing my wife for the last several months, and I think it's important to know who this duckhead is. Paul who? She blushed crimson and fidgeted in her spot on the sofa. She kept her eyes down as I glared at her. You have to promise you won't hurt him if I tell you his name, she said, her eyes coming up quickly. Can't promise that. I will only promise that I will not kill him. I could see the wheels turning in her brain. She squirmed. She blushed some more. She opened her mouth to speak several times, but nothing came out. I'll take it that you are protecting Paul because you care for him more than me if you don't tell me, I said, making air quotes when I said her lover's first name. He obviously knows you are married, and I'm sure you've talked about me some. Yet I know nothing about him. You have kept something from me, which makes you a liar by omission, in addition to a cheater. Oh, yeah, let's also add untrustworthy and disrespectful. I watched as several emotions flew across her face. Tears dripped from her eyes. I was guessing she never considered her dishonesty and disrespect in this episode, and I knew my accusation would unsettle her further. An hour earlier, her obvious discomfort would have caused me to wrap her in my arms. Now, it was all I could do to keep myself from strangling her with my bare hands. Paul Vickers. He's a teaching assistant at the university, she said barely above a whisper. I know. My jaw dropped at her admission. Monique was the administrative assistant to the dean of the fine arts department of our local small university. All of the teaching assistants in fine arts were younger than 30 years old, as far as I knew. You've got to be kidding me, I rasped as I slowly sat down on the sofa, my head suddenly starting to ache. You're ducking a kid. I told you I don't like, she started to say. I don't give a duck what you like anymore. We can add pervert to your list of offenses, I suppose, I accused. She started to respond, thought better of it and sat there silently. So why did you confess, Monique? You had everything going your way, including having a clueless husband. Why confess to me? To rub my face in it? I asked. She finally looked at me, although the tears continued to run down her cheeks. I had to tell you. The guilt was killing me, she said softly. I love you, Joshua. Keeping this from you was taking a toll on me. You felt guilty because you knew it was wrong. You knew it was wrong because it was wrong, I sneered. You stepped out on your vows. Why, Monique? Am I that terrible a husband? Am I that bad in bed? No. You're a great husband. You're great in bed, she answered quickly. This wasn't about you. It was about me. We didn't plan it. It just happened. It just happened. Really. Paul Vickers was just walking by one day and his deck just fell into your account. Yeah, I got it. She glared at me for a moment until I glared back. We sat there with our eyes locked on each other for a few seconds before she broke off. Well, I asked. She huffed and blew out a deep breath before telling me that Paul was a shy, gentle 25-year-old. Their first conversations were strictly business, but after a while they started talking on a more personal basis. She was surprised to find out that Paul was still a virgin. She found it very endearing when he blushed and told her that in almost a whisper, telling her he just wasn't very good with girls. Much to my chagrin, my wife had always been what I call a fixer. Through the years she had insinuated herself into the broken relationships of several friends, trying to get that friend and an estranged partner back together. To my amazement, she had been successful more often than not. I've always been afraid that when she failed, both parties would blame her and end their friendships, but so far that hadn't happened. She and the kids started going out to lunch occasionally, she continued, and she started building up his ego. It was during a Friday lunch with 2 margaritas that Paul leaned over and gave her a soft kiss. She said she knew she should stop him at that point, but she was so pleased with his increased boldness that she returned his kiss. They kissed several more times, and when she got back to the fine arts office, her boss, Dr. Lindley Hicks, pointed out to her that her lipstick was a bit smudged. "He's certainly a cutie," Monique said Dr. Hicks told her. A few days later, Dr. Hicks told her that she wouldn't be averse to Monique taking a longer lunch hour occasionally, and the two shared a knowing look. She took her boss's advice, and the next time the two went to lunch, they wound up back at Paul's apartment, where they made out like horny teenagers for a while, before Monique started to undress the younger man. It was tender and sweet as I guided him through losing his cherry. For a first-timer, he was very attentive, and it was one of the best experiences of my life, honestly, she said, her voice dreamy while her eyes looked unfocused at the memory. It was wrong and sweet, and he was so appreciative when we were done. I've got to admit that I felt really good about what we had done. And that was the beginning. After that we had long lunches once or twice each week. I taught him several positions and how to satisfy me orally. Once we got rolling, he even asked about several other options, and we worked through everything either one of us could think of or wanted to try. She started our story in a tentative voice, but she finished in a clear, concise tone, and her face was glowing. "Duck." I put my head in my hands. Hopefully she didn't see the tears in my eyes. "Duck," I finally whispered. "You're so proud of yourself for ducking a virgin and making him a man, even though we are married." After what I felt was a long silence, she finally said, "I care for him greatly, Josh, but I don't love him the way I love you. You're my husband, and you'll always be." She stopped herself from saying it again. "He's a really great kid, Joshua. I think you'd like him if you two ever meet." "Pretty sure that would be a really bad idea, Mo. You do realize you're ducking a kid who is the same age as our oldest child?" I queried. She shrugged. Once again it took everything I had not to choke the sheet out of her. Who was this woman? Where was the woman I married? I didn't know about her, but between the sex we had earlier and what she had dropped on me after, I was absolutely exhausted. I saw that it was 3 a.m. and was glad that it was Sunday and I had the whole day off. I shut the television off and headed up the stairs. Monique followed me, until I turned into the guest room. She stopped in the hallway and looked at me, confused. I shook my head sadly, shut the door and locked it. I woke, sort of, at 8:37. I'd slept, sort of, for slightly more than 5 hours. I hope my wife slept just as poorly as I had. I staggered downstairs and made a pot of coffee. Monique must have smelled the brew, because she staggered downstairs 5 minutes later, fortunately looking every bit as bad as I felt. I got up, poured her a cup and added a splash of milk. She smiled weakly at me. We both drank our cups in silence. "Another?" I asked as I got up with my cup. She nodded. I poured her another cup and added the requisite milk. "I don't think you're seeing the big picture here, Joshua," she finally said to break the silence. I stared at her in disbelief. "Okay, you have the floor. Explain please," I said. "Like I told you a few hours ago, I've never turned you down and I never will," she started. "As you know, I love sex. Always have, hope I always will. Paul adds another element to my sex life. He's new, different and yes, part of the fun has been because it's been risky. But in the last few months I've never felt so alive. I've got my loving husband and my young lover. You and I are still going at it pretty good for a pair of 50-year-olds. Then I've got an adorable young stud who thinks I invented sex. He makes me feel like the sexiest woman alive and we go at it hard. He's a wonderful lover. And I need to hear this why," I snapped. "Are you telling me that you'd prefer him in bed? And I'm supposed to be happy to hear this? You're the best man I know, Josh, and I know you'd want me to be happy because you love me so much. I know that. So what I want is to keep the status quo for a while longer. He'll finish his doctorate next year and then move on, and you and I can then ride off into our golden years together," she explained. "What the duck are you talking about, woman?" I growled. "Not only have you been having an affair for several months behind my back, but now you confess and expect me to let it continue for another year or so. How stupid do you think I am? I'm thinking maybe we could keep this marriage together if you would get counseling, and you're thinking that I'll let you keep your lover. You must be ducking nuts. What have you done with my wife?" "We've been incredibly discreet so far. We will continue to be incredibly discreet. Nobody but the three of us has to know," she argued. "And your matchmaker boss, of course," I snarled. "How many people do you think she's already told?" "Dr. Hicks won't tell anybody. She's a friend," Monique remarked. "A friend would have tried to talk you out of this insanity, not given you time off from work to duck around on your husband," I said, my voice rising in volume. "You told me before that she's a bit of a free spirit to quote you. Divorced once, gets some on the side occasionally while married a second time, I remember you telling me. I'm sure she's very pleased to know she's not the only slut in her department." Monique's visage changed from guilty to angry at my slut comment. I didn't care and wasn't holding back. I'm not a slut, she claimed. Paul and I have been very discreet. You've been sleeping with another man behind your husband's back. That's the very definition of slut in my book. I raged back. I'll find a lawyer tomorrow and get started on a divorce. You can keep him. I'll leave. Divorce? I'm not going to agree to a divorce. Haven't you been listening to me? I love you, she screeched. Actions speak louder than words, babe. You ducking another guy hardly says love. Stop ducking this kid and get some counseling. If I think you're sincere, I won't file. No, I'm not going to let you control my life. He won't interfere in our marriage. I promise, she said. He's already interfered. He knew you were married. You told him. And it doesn't matter who made the first move. You broke your vows to me with him. Why did you really confess, Monique? You told me it was so you could relieve your guilt over your cheating. It was to make you feel better over your cheating. You felt guilty because you know this is wrong. Telling me doesn't change what you did. You cheated. Whether you feel guilty about it or not, you still cheated. Cheating is wrong. You just told me you're going to continue. So what choice do I have? There are way more choices than divorce. We've been together for 27 years, have a great marriage, and boom, one mistake and we're divorced. She asked incredulously. Ah, if it was just one mistake, I replied. A one-time slip, a mistake in judgment. But you've been cheating with him for several months. You had your one-time slip, then kept slipping and slipping, over and over again. You put a knife into my heart, then just kept stabbing me again and again. Hardly a one-time mistake. This is a planned betrayal. You've lied to me, cheated on me, disrespected me. Yet you keep telling me that you love me. Answer me this. Have you lied to Paul, cheated on Paul, or disrespected Paul? Of course you haven't. You love Paul. Then why did you do all of those things to me if you love me? Large tears were leaking down her cheeks. She looked frustrated because I wasn't going along with her version of love. If you don't want a divorce, show me that I'm your one and only love and drop him now, I said. I've told you. I can love more than you, but you are my number one. But I have real feelings for him. It's not cheap tawdry sex. I have feelings for him. We make love like you and I do, but you are my husband, you get me whenever you want. He only gets to have me occasionally, and he understands that. Why can't you understand that and live with that? He gets that and he's only 25. You twice that and you don't get it. Wake up and join the 21st century, Monique lectured. I could tell by the look on her face that she thought she scored a direct hit on that one. Her going from demure to slut wasn't 21st century, it was merely throwing away her principles to rationalize her recent poor decisions. I realized then that this was an argument I would never win because she was no longer the same woman I had married 27 years before. She had evolved, for want of a better word, into a different person. One who could accept her own infidelity because of her self-absorption. Where once we had been a team, now we were two individuals, with her being the important one and me there to complement her. I realized that if I gave in to her now, this would just be the first of many such occurrences. Regardless of what she was saying now, after Paul there would be others. She had needs and apparently, I could no longer fulfill all of them. I had become her steady, loving backup plan. She would find others to rock her world. Nah, not happening. When I went into work Monday, I told my boss what was happening in my life and told him I needed to take off every afternoon for the next week to do some errands and reconnaissance. He was sympathetic to my plight and told me I had more than enough personal time banked. He also gave me the name of the attorney he used when he divorced his wife for cheating on him several years ago. Based on what Monique had told me, I rented a nondescript car for the week and was planning to be outside of her office every day at noon, waiting for her to go to Paul's apartment for their weekly or twice-weekly trysts. She didn't leave her office for lunch on Monday, and on Tuesday I followed her to a nearby McDonald's. I hit pay dirt on Wednesday when she went to an old house in the neighborhood of the university that had apparently been made into several apartments. I barely got my car parked when she walked into the house after a quick knock on the door. Since we lived in a no-fault divorce state, I didn't need proof of her cheating for the court, but I wanted some confirmation for myself. I sat in my car with binoculars trained on his apartment door, and was rewarded with my confirmation when she came out of the apartment about 90 minutes later, with him following to the door shirtless, wearing a pair of jeans. She leaned into him at the door, and the two were a lot less than discreet, as they tried to suck each other's tonsils out for about a minute. Looking back, the passionate kiss broke my heart, and probably was the dagger in the heart of my marriage. The ducking kid stayed at his door and watched with a gaze of adoration on his face, as Monique got in her car and drove off. Quite frankly, I was surprised with his look. He had longish, stringy dark brown hair, and was thin to the point of being gaunt. In the past, Monique and I probably would have commented on his meth head look. At twice his age, I look to be much more fit and better looking, if I do say so myself. I honestly wondered what my wife was doing with this guy. I mean, I guess I figured that if I was going to lose my wife to another man, I wanted it to be somebody I considered worthy of her beauty, not a refugee from the perp walk. My appointment with the attorney was on Thursday. He assured me he could have her served Monday at her office. I was going for maximum embarrassment. The gloves were off. The first phone call from Monique came in at 10:35, which by my way of thinking, meant that she probably got served at 10:34. I didn't pick up. This went on 4 more times. Then I got a call from the office of the Fine Arts Department dean. I knew she was getting desperate when she brought her friends into the act. I still didn't answer. I had already told the company switchboard to tell her I was out for the day when she called in. Monique always got home before me from work, so I knew she would be waiting for me when I walked in the door at home. I took a deep breath before opening the door. "How could you do that to me?" she cried. "I thought you loved me. You know I still love you." "How do I know that you still love me? We've already gone over this. You've been cheating on me for months, and have told me you don't plan to stop even though I now know it's happening. That's not love. That's you being a selfish witch. I loved the woman that was my wife up until a few months ago, not the cheating slut she's become." "I am not a slut. Don't keep calling me that," she yelled. "You're wrong. You're a slut. You're a cheating slut, regardless of what you think. Sluts duck men who aren't their husbands. That makes you a slut." I spied her phone on the kitchen counter and snatched it up. "Wait, what are you doing? You can't invade my privacy," she screeched. "That's rich. Call a cop or a lawyer. A wife who's not a slut shouldn't worry about her husband looking at her phone. Here, to be fair, you can look at mine." I reached into my pocket, grabbed my phone and tossed it on the counter. I then opened her phone and saw that her last 5 outgoing calls were to her lover. "Yeah, this just screams I love you. Did the little ducker comfort you in his bed today?" I asked. If her eyes could shoot lasers, I would have been dead. She stammered several times trying to speak. It was somewhat disgusting when spittle started shooting out of her mouth. "If you would just use your head, you would see that this hasn't hurt us or our marriage," she finally blurted out. "My being with Paul hasn't taken anything from you. If anything, it's added to our marriage. You have to admit I'm happier, and we probably have more sex than most of our friends because I'm happier and more satisfied." She might as well have just kicked me in the balls. I stood frozen for a couple of seconds before my brain came back to me. "So you're telling me that you're fired up sexually for me because of what your lover gives to you? It's down to him. So he's your sexual go-to. He's number 1. I'm second. That's just fucking perfect. We're done here." No. I didn't mean it like that. You're my husband. You're number 1, she cried. I slowly shook my head. I heard exactly what she said. I wasn't born yesterday. "No, Monique. You said exactly what you meant," I said. "I heard it. Message received. Now you just have to own the consequences. I go my way. You go yours. Yours can include that ducking kid if you want. It won't matter to me anymore." "That's not what I want. I want you. Just give me a little more time with him, and then I'll be yours forever," she wailed. "You either can't see it or don't want to see it," I said. "I'm talking divorce and you're still trying to negotiate interjecting the kid into our marriage. No kid or no marriage. And even then, it's not a done deal." 2 days later I was again parked outside of the kid's apartment, this time not waiting on my wife to show up. I was specifically waiting for him to get back from whatever he was doing, so the two of us could talk. Well, sort of. An hour later, he finally showed up. I waited for him to get out of his car before I approached. "Paul Vickers," I called as I approached. He stopped walking and let me get close. Too close for him, unfortunately. I walked straight up to him, pulled up my right hand and hit him square on the nose, causing blood to spurt and him to fall to one knee. As he grabbed his face in pain with one hand and tried to hold up his other arm to fend off another attack, I could see recognition register in his panicked eyes, even though we had never officially met. "Yeah, that's right. I'm Monique Hardesti's husband," I yelled down at him. "She taught you how to duck. Now, I've taught you what happens when you duck another man's wife. Assuming you've got a father, he most certainly should have taught you that." His visage of recognition morphed into one of fear. He could see I was bigger, fitter and had rage on my side. He whimpered, waiting for me to finish my attack. He will never know how close I came to beating him to a pulp. I looked down at him and literally growled in anger, seeing him trembling in fear, but then good sense won the day, and I decided that I didn't want to spend a good chunk of the rest of my life in prison. "You're not worth it, you little sheet. But just so you know, if she hasn't already told you, I've served my slut of a wife with divorce papers. You can have her." He remained down on one knee, whimpering like a pathetic witch. I watched him for a few seconds while my breathing returned to normal. Then I walked back to my car and drove home. I probably could have been arrested for steering wheel abuse. I was gripping it that tightly. I was reclining in my lazy boy drinking a shot of Jameson Irish whiskey when Monique walked in and marched right up to my chair, practically breathing fire. "How dare you beat that boy?" she screamed. "Do you feel like a big man now? Do you feel better?" She was breathing fire and spoiling for a fight. Time was my ally here. Deliberately I picked up my whiskey and took a sip before responding. "I actually feel only a little better. I probably would have felt much better if I would have beaten him senseless. I only hit him once, just once. I could have done much worse to him, the little ducker. You taught him some lessons. It was my turn to teach. You don't duck another man's wife." I glared straight into her eyes. I could see her fists were balled until my last statement. She unclenched her hands and started to cry. "Duck." I was getting tired of all the waterworks. Why is it that she ducks up, but figures she has the right to cry? "You only hit him once?" she asked in a very small voice. I nodded, picked up my glass and took another sip. "I suppose you expect me to thank you for not beating the snot out of him?" she asked. "At this point, I don't expect nor want anything from you, except for you to leave me the duck alone and sign the damn divorce papers," I shot back. We lived like roommates for the next few weeks. I got myself dinner each night and slept in the locked guest room. We only talked when it was necessary communication. I was watching English Premier League soccer one evening when she sauntered into the room wearing a tight t-shirt, braless and barely covering a pair of small bikini panties. It was a look she knew I liked very much, and considering we hadn't had sex in several weeks, she knew how it would affect me. I was sitting on the chaise end of the sofa, and Monique settled in right up against my right side. A few minutes later, she shifted her legs up next to mine on the chaise, and settled in closer. We had done this often since our kids had left the house. I was well aware of what Monique was doing, but it had been so long since I had gotten anything from her. I was willing to go along with this and see how it played out. It played out exactly how I thought it would. She laid on top of me for several minutes as we both enjoyed our afterglow in silence, my arms holding her body tight. Lord, I was really going to miss this woman. "That was fantastic as always, Joshua. You know you're going to miss this if you leave," she said quietly. "That was really great, Monique. You're right. I will miss this when I'm gone," I said. Her eyes shot open in horrified shock. "Wait, you're still going to leave after that?" she inquired. "Seriously? We were so good together. Did you really think I was going to fall for that? You were going to duck me, stupid," I replied. "It was absolutely wonderful, but it didn't change anything. I was just using you, the way you've been using me since you started your affair. I've become your safety net. We both know it." She at least had the good grace to look guilty. "Still, you can't deny we are good together. I don't want a divorce. I want you. But not enough to stop ducking that kid, right? God, you're one-track recording, aren't you? He's outside of us. Can't you get that through your head? I only want him once or twice a week. You and I do it much more than that, and I want you to be with me for the rest of our lives," she said. It was more of the same old, blah, blah, blah. This thing with the kid just wasn't going to go away anytime soon. That meant I had to go away, as soon as possible. Duck. I remember when she cared about me that way. I had to be the one to tell our two kids, Lori, 25, and Rance, 23, about the divorce and the reason for it. Lori was shocked at both Monique's cheating and the age of her lover. "Oh my God, Dad, he's the same age as me. Am I going to have to watch her around my boyfriend?" Lori asked, sounding dead serious. Our son has always been a bit protective of my wife. I could tell by the sound of his voice that he didn't want to believe my accusation was true. "That doesn't sound right, Dad. Mom loves you beyond reason," he said. "Past tense, Rance," I answered. "She's been trying to get me to let her keep this kid until he gets his doctorate next year. If you don't believe me, ask her yourself. She won't lie to you if you ask her directly." "I'm sorry, Dad. I would never have thought he let the statement go unfinished." Monique called me at least once a week trying to get me to change my mind until the divorce was finalized 6 months later. Since she always refused to stop having sex with the kid, my answer was always the same. I knew that doing the right thing for myself was definitely not the easy thing. I supposed I would always love her, but I'd never be able to respect myself if I allowed her to continually disrespect me. The divorce being finalized didn't mean much for me right away in terms of my social life. I knew very few single people, and in truth, it had been almost 30 years since I had been on a date with someone not named Monique. I assumed Monique would increase the amount of time she spent with her lover. I know I increased the amount of time I spent at my office. My boss actually sent me home several times, citing my own mental health. Our divorce shocked most of our friends. Well, I didn't go seeking out people to tell. I didn't lie if they asked what had precipitated the event. To most people, Monique was seen as almost prim and proper, so the thought of her cheating, especially with a 25-year-old college student, was just about scandalous. I could practically feel the eyes and hear the whispers whenever I saw close friends of my ex-wife when I was out and about. I certainly wasn't keeping track of my ex and her lover, so I wasn't aware when he earned his doctorate a year later. I found out when Monique called to tell me and asked about the possibility of us getting back together now that Paul had accepted a job several states away. I told you it would end when he got his PhD, she said. I was never going to go with him when he left. I'm old enough to be his mother. You're also old enough to know better than to be ducking a kid, but that didn't seem to stop you, did it? I snarked back. But that's old history now. How about we get back together? You know I still love you, she said. Why can't we start over fresh? You don't seem to have a lot going on at the moment. Are you insane, woman? Do I have to quote you chapter and verse why that will never happen? I responded. Monique didn't feel the need to hide her dating once the kid left, and she started dating people more in her age range. I ran into her 2 straight weeks at 2 different places with 2 different guys. She greeted me both times with enthusiastic hugs. She saw me look askance when I realized that her date the second time was different than the one she was with the week before. You don't get to criticize anymore. What can I say? This little adventure has shown me I like sex and variety. You had your chance, she said. Not criticizing, I said. Just surprise, as much as anything. I suppose after what you did to me, I shouldn't be surprised, but I guess I still thought of you as a moral person, a good person. What happened to the woman I once married? It was easy to see that she wasn't happy with my assessment of her metamorphosis. Duck you, Joshua, she said harshly, the first time I had ever heard her use the F-bomb. Not in this lifetime ever again, I said as she stalked off to where her date was waiting. Monique was married about a year later, my kids informed me. They said my successor was about 10 years younger than their mother, but seemed to be a good guy. I decided I needed to do something nice for myself and break out of my personal slump, so it was time to dump my SUV and buy a Ford Mustang Shelby GT500. Yes, I've heard all those jokes about older men needing to have something flashy to entice women, but for me it was about style and horsepower, and, who am I kidding, enticing women. I giggled like a schoolgirl as I got on the Ford site and looked at all the Mustang models, options and colors. I decided on a bright blue color and went with the stick. If I was going to buy a statement car, of course it was going to be stick. You don't buy a hot car to sit in the seat like a prim grandma. Sorry, Granny. My favorite car salesman at my local Ford dealership had retired and moved south, so I wound up with a guy I'd never seen before. He seemed really full of himself and introduced himself as Rob Martin. I chuckled inwardly. If I was going to be buying a cliché hot car, I guess it was only fitting that I buy it from a cliché car salesman. When I stuck my hand out to shake his and introduce myself to him, he cut me off, saying, I already know who you are. You are my wife's first husband, Joshua Hardesty. Hey, if this is going to be too weird for you, I can get you somebody else. In another lifetime I probably would have switched off to another salesman or gone out and bought a Corvette instead, but sometimes my puckish side takes over. It was time for Monique's influence on my life to be tossed aside. I decided he was going to be my salesman, but he was going to earn the sale. Nah, we're good, unless you're going to ask me to take her back or something, I said with a chuckle, to clearly show him I was kidding. I knew he wasn't expecting that. He looked surprised, but then caught himself and chuckled back, clearly playing along. Not a chance of that, he said with a laugh of his own. I had perused the lot earlier, so I knew there were 4 Mustangs on the ground, one of them a 6-speed, so naturally that was the one I wanted to test drive. I can't drive a stick, Rob said, the perpetual smarmy smile suddenly gone. I'll get one of the guys to bring it up here, then we can hit the road. Nah. Let's walk out there and get it ourselves. Give me the keys, I'll get it out from wherever it is. I didn't figure you could drive a stick. Not many people under 50 can. You look about 40. That figures. I know Monique has a thing for younger guys, I said cheerfully. I'm 41, he said as we walked toward the Mustangs on the lot. I guess that would make me 10 years younger than you. Monique has told me you two were the same age. Still makes you 16 years older than the guy she cheated on me with. So she obviously didn't find you at the university or in the parking lot at the high school, I said with another chuckle. Rob didn't look quite as full of himself as we got into a black Mustang to drive. She's a beauty, moves really well, I said as we drove around town. Yeah, she still is hot, and she really is something in bed, too. Best duck I've ever had. I can't believe you divorced her over a little sex. It had nothing to do with you, bud, he said. Actually, I was talking about the car, Rob, but I'm sure Mo is still pretty good in this act, too. He dropped his head in embarrassment, and I did my best not to smile at his discomfort. As long as we're going to go there, Rob, you should be aware that Monique knew that in my world there was no such thing as a little sex. I was under the impression that we thought the same about infidelity until she decided to change the rules. Then I guess after the kid left, she had some middle-aged crazy and went through guys like she changes shoes, but by then it wasn't my problem, I said in the most even tone I could manage. Just so you know, I wouldn't have turned her loose for her affair. She's way too much woman for just one man, he answered. I made my choices. You make yours. I'm glad you're happy with her, I said. Now, let's order me a Mustang. Rob was a pure salesman. As soon as I mentioned spending money, our previous conversation was forgotten, at least short term. We went back into the dealership and I ordered a bright blue Shelby GT500. Rob was very happy with me putting some commission dollars in his pocket. I had to wonder what the talk would be at his kitchen table tonight. A few months later my daughter, Lori, got married. She and Monique did a great job of organizing the wedding, and I paid the freight. Rob and I were at the bride's parents' table together, and you would have thought we were best buddies. I know Monique was a bit put off by how friendly her husband was to me. I danced with a lot of women during the evening, but my ex was not on my dance card. At one point during the evening, she even asked me to dance, with Rob's agreement, but I politely declined. You know, Joshua, you're going to have to get yourself a life someday. You can't be pining over me for the rest of your life, she lectured. Have you even had any relationship since our divorce? Your concern for me is touching, I said. Too bad you didn't care about my feelings like this toward the end of our marriage. I felt my anger rising, and I had promised my daughter that I wouldn't do anything to ruin her big day. I quickly looked around and spotted Monique's cousin, Caitlin, a large-chested single 40-something, sitting alone at a table. The band had just started up again after a break, so I was able to make a graceful escape. Goddamn, your cousin is a sexy beast, I said as I rose from my chair and headed over. I think Monique was still talking to me as I left. I know I heard Rob laughing at his wife. I knew he would pay for that later. Caitlin and I danced several fast dances and a couple of slow ones. I knew full well what she was doing when she plastered her curvaceous body to mine on the slow songs. I knew she felt my heart on pressing up against her stomach several times. We spent the night together at my apartment after the wedding, and she accompanied me to the morning after breakfast we held at a hotel. I noted Monique trying very hard to control her anger when we walked in together. I dated Caitlin for about a month before she told me that we couldn't continue because of family concerns. I raised an eyebrow skeptically. She explained to me that Monique had apparently raised the ire of several of the family's matriarchy because Caitlin was dating her ex. So much for wanting me to have a life after her. Although Caitlin and I were starting to get close, she couldn't take the pressure from the rest of the family and regretfully wanted to end our relationship. I was unhappy, to say the least, but Caitlin mollified me a bit by promising to introduce me to two of her good friends who were single. I agreed only because I didn't want to get in between Caitlin and her family. So if these are such good friends, how come I never met them before? I asked suspiciously. Because they are such good friends. I might have let you meet them after a few years, she giggled. I liked both of Caitlin's friends right from the jump. They were both pretty with good bodies. I dated both for a couple of months before I finally made a decision as to which one I was going to concentrate my attentions on. Anne Rethlake was a tall, thin woman with strawberry blonde hair and green eyes. She was 5 years younger than me at 49, and was a high school English teacher. She had divorced a cheating husband 7 years previously. Her 3 kids were all out of the house, with 2 of them married. She was funny, smart, and in no hurry to take that next step. She totally got my uneasiness of moving quickly into a new relationship. Burned once, twice shy didn't begin to describe me. This wonderful woman let me take our relationship glacially slow, and over the next 2 years proved to me that not all women were selfish or. As my love for her grew, my love for Monique gradually melted away, something I would never have figured. It was a small wedding, with just close family and friends. My kids liked Anne and knew she was good for me. Her kids and I became friends as well. A phone call from my son interrupted a quiet Friday evening a few months later. He was calling to tell me my ex was in the hospital emergency room after being beaten by her current husband. I was surprised because I thought Rob was a pretty good guy, and he had repeatedly lectured me about giving up Monique for just sex, as he and Monique called it. Apparently she's got a black eye and he knocked a tooth out, my son said, describing Monique's injuries. He caught her cheating on him, didn't he? I asked. Well, yeah, Dad, but you didn't beat her when you caught her, he said. Maybe that just proves he's smarter than me, I said. Bet you one thing, if they stay together, she won't try that again. That's cold, Dad. She was your wife for 27 years. He started. But she cheated on me and now she's his wife, his problem, I said. Let's face it, Rance, your mom's a slut. I handled it my way. Rob handled it his way. He told me once he wouldn't have divorced her for cheating on him. Apparently his way is to beat her. Who's to say who is right? Again, not my problem. Give her my best when you visit. Good night, Sonny. Who was on the phone? Josh. Anne asked as she walked into the room, a glass of tequila for me in her hands, and wearing nothing but a tight, short wife beater. That was my son letting me know Monique's having some marital problems. I told him I wasn't interested, I said. Anne handed me the drink and gently straddled my hips as she sat down. I smiled brightly. Life didn't turn out too badly for me, after all. That's it for today. If you enjoyed today's story, drop a like and comment before you leave. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any video. Goodbye for now and I'll see you soon for our next story.